Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here. My name is Patrick O'Malley, and I'm the founder of ShiftChange. For anyone who is new here, here's the quick version of what this community is. ShiftChange is a community and media platform for clinicians who are building something on their own. Physicians, nurse practitioners, and PAs, all who are launching businesses, creating products, doing consulting work, or building a career that doesn't depend on the next shift. And here's how it works. We gather inside of a private community and we run live sessions very much like this one today with people who are already doing the thing that you are trying to do. And we share our playbooks, our connections, and honest feedback that move you forward faster than doing it alone. If that sounds like you, you're in the right room. And today we're going to be talking about something that used to be completely off limits for most of us, and that's building software. For years, if you had an idea for an app or a tool, your only real options were to hire a developer, raise money, or give up on it. All of that has changed. AI has put the ability to build real working products into the hands of people who have never written a line of code. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do this, and most people are doing it the wrong way. That's why I asked our guest to join us. Caleb Hamilton is the co founder and COO of Twin Sun, a custom software development company. He has over 15 years of client-facing mobile app development experience from the old BlackBerry phones to current iPhone and Android devices. And he's got over a decade of experience running operations across two businesses. But more than that, Caleb is a go-giver. He truly wants to help others succeed and to share his knowledge in the process. So today, Caleb's going to walk us through a practical framework for building with AI. Not hype and no guesswork, but a real system that starts with planning and keeps your work safe and reversible the whole way through. By the end of today's session, you will understand how to take an idea and turn it into something real without needing an engineering team. Caleb, welcome. Thank you for being here, and the floor is all yours.
All right, cool. Well, I will jump right in here. So, first of all, hello everyone. Thank you for taking time to listen to this. I hope it is very helpful. I have two disclosures that I want to cover before I jump right in. So, the first one is this is actually my first ever webinar, probably my first time presenting slides to anyone since I was in school 25 something years ago. So, if I'm nervous or if I appear nervous, it's because I am. So that's my first disclosure there. The second one is. Everything I'm going to talk about, kind of all the examples I'm going to show, are based on using Claude as an AI agent. That is my preferred AI agent. But I just want to call out that even though these are highly specific to Claude, I am sure most other popular agents can do the exact same stuff that we're talking about, whether it's a Gemini or a Chat GPT or something like that. But I do want to call that out because I would strongly suggest Claude being used for everything. So who am I? So I'm Caleb Hamilton. I am the co-founder and COO of a company called Twin Sun. We're a very small custom software development agency located in Nashville, Tennessee. Myself, I've got about 20 years of mobile app development experience. The majority of that has been consulting and developing software for founders and entrepreneurs. Lots and lots of work with startups, lots of work with first to market products. And I was very fortunate enough to start my career in this type of agency work about 2 decades ago at the peak of BlackBerry. It might age me a little bit here, but my career started when everybody had a BlackBerry phone and iPhones and Android phones were on the horizon. But it was unique because I got to kind of launch into this career working on a lot of pretty big first to market apps. So I wrote Ticketmaster and WebMD for BlackBerry about 20 years ago. So those were cool. And then moving on, I've done a lot of work with SiriusXM and a lot of their apps, iPhone, Android, their car apps, as well as like eHarmony for Android. That's just naming a few. But really beyond those, I mean, I've probably helped build or exclusively built hundreds of first to market products for a lot of different founders and startups. Long story, extremely short. The company I was at grew to about 150 people. I was running operations, and in 2017, myself and one of my closest friends who was running business development at the time, we left and we wanted to start our own thing. So we started Twin Sun in 2017, and the simplest way I can summarize this is we did this because we genuinely want to help people, right? We were at an agency that grew. It grew for the sake of growth. It felt like bad money, bad growth, lots of not sustainable decisions because we weren't in control. And we said, we're sick of this. We really just want to do things the way we want to do and focus on people first, because we want to be the best stewards of our clients as we possibly can be, which is unfortunately a very hard thing to find in agency work. So for today, what am I going to cover today? So my goal is to really just educate on high level software planning concepts. These concepts should improve the usage of AI, especially if you are trying to use AI to write code. I will not be going into like specific coding technical details. Like I won't be focusing on different languages. I won't be focusing on, different setups. The honest answer there is there's tens of thousands of different languages out there. Everyone's computer setup is completely different. And most of those situations are a little bit better suited for one-on-one help. So I'm not really going to be like deep diving into looking at code examples or how does code work. I think that would just be a little bit too much for a talk like this. But I will cover all of these core concepts that we at Twin Sun have applied, and we've used these concepts to actually start building rather autonomous AI development agents that we work with that help us day to day. So the goal here is everything I'm going to explain should take you from a product idea to code ready. Like you should feel confident, like, all right, I can use AI to actually write good and sustainable code, right? Like code that we could use or bring to an engineering team at some point, and it would make sense. So that's really what I'm going to cover. Kind of for this overview, the main planning concepts I'm going to talk through are just different types of common software systems that we see a lot, that I've built a lot for something called MVP development. I'm going to touch on the importance of code architecture at a very high level. Like, what does it mean really when people say this stuff? And then I also want to talk about using something called user stories to actually plan software work. All of this again is focused on getting AI code ready, and then I'm going to go in and show examples of me working with Claude to tackle software planning things and how to effectively use context windows and even what are those, and I'll talk about things like project scaffolds or templates. Just a lot of this stuff again is more software planning, but I want to show how you can actually use AI to set yourself up for success. The last thing, if we have time, I can end with some rather comical and interesting AI related stories because I've seen a lot in my career. So those are always fun to get to. But let's go ahead and kind of kick things off with these planning essentials. So I mentioned MVP. Let's start with that. So what the heck is MVP, right? This is a term you all may have heard before, and it's slightly subjective, I will say, but really MVP stands for your minimal viable product. Most commonly, this is referring to the necessary and minimal amount of functionality a product needs to go live. Oftentimes, instead of go live, I like to use the term make revenue. That's something I consult with, any clients we have is like, all right, well, what do we need to do to make US dollars, right? Like that's clearly going to be a goal for a lot of entrepreneurs and founders. And so we tend to focus on that type of a goal and say, what is the actual scope here? What do we need to build versus want to build in order to get a successful product out that can make revenue, that can have users and stuff? So in the software development world, there's really four majorly common pieces to an MVP product that I've seen. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit. So kind of the first one is a web app. Again, this might be elementary level information, but a web app is very specifically a website with app-like functionality. It is client-facing. It looks good on mobile devices, and it runs within a web browser. It is a very popular choice for a lot of initial builds because you can just build one system, right? And whether or not you're on mobile devices or web devices, you can access that system and utilize it like an app. But it is a website at the end of the day. It is something that is, housed on the internet. It is not something you download from a store and install on your phone. The second piece, I kind of talked about it a little bit with the download from the store thing, but these are actual mobile apps, right? So this is not a web app. This is not something that lives somewhere on the internet. You do not access it by a web browser, but these are the client-facing applications that I'm sure everyone in here has, downloaded and installed something from Google Play or the Apple App Store before, right? So these would be actual applications you would develop and release through stores, and people would download and install them on their phones. The third major piece here is a backend system. The analogy I kind of run with is like, if your web app or mobile apps are like the body, it's like the visual, like the backend is all of the organs, right? This is a non-client facing system. It lives hosted somewhere in the cloud. Typically, if you've heard services like Amazon Web Services or AWS or Microsoft Azure, that would be a solution to host this backend system. This system handles all of your data, and all of this data is exposed through something called an API, which I will talk about in just a second here. And then the fourth kind of common system we see is what I would call a middleware system. So this is essentially like a non-client or exposed or client-facing system that simply is a backend and an API that exists to connect multiple other systems. So we've had a lot of work in the past where you might have an entrepreneur that says, "Oh, I have this CRM over here and I love it, but it doesn't do everything I need to do. And I've got this other system that actually does the things I need to do. I need to marry these systems together. They need to talk to each other." That would be an example of a middleware solution. We are building a non-client facing, usable system that just exists, and it connects data between other external systems. So let's drill in a little bit more and kind of look at how you would lay these systems out. I will say this is a very high level. These are often called, system design diagrams, system architecture diagrams, but this is a very, very high level of what something like this would look like. So in this example here, we are looking at a very high level, system design diagram of a web app. The major pieces here that we just talked about on the last slide are the backend system, which you can see there towards the top with the API. And then you have the web app itself, which is below it. So those two obviously are the two critical pieces. The web app, if you notice, it talks to the backend system, right? So it talks to the backend system through this concept of an API. An API is quite literally just a bunch of different URLs that your web app would hit the URL to send or retrieve data from this backend system. It is important to note that I do have these users off to the side, like the iPhone, Android phones, and web browsers. All of them in this scenario would be using that web app. Again, emphasizing this is a popular choice for a lot of MVP builds because we're building one system that can reach every user we would want. Two other things I'll note here. This database picture, that's always included in these diagrams. Honestly, the real reason is just showing that we plan to have a database. There's not much beyond that, just knowing there's a place that data needs to be, housed, and that database is connected to our backend system. So that's important to include. And then I also tossed in something that I do see commonly with a lot of MVP builds, and that is what I would call a marketing site. A marketing site is separate, and I do want to define what I mean by that. And that is a website that is informational only, right? So like my company's website, it's like that is a marketing website. That's not something we went in and coded all these crazy features into. Those are typically just built using like a Wix or a WordPress or a drag and drop website builder. But I did want to include those in those diagrams just to show how those things can exist and they're not really connected to anything else in the system, even though they may exist. The last thing I'll note here is everything within that dashed line. This is the part that is hosted on the internet, right? So something like, when people say in the cloud, that is that dashed line, right? So all of this solution exists hosted somewhere in the cloud using an Amazon Web Services or using a Microsoft Azure or any of the infinite other solutions. If we take this a step further and we look at the same diagram and we now include the mobile app piece, right? You'll notice it looks very much the same, but there's obviously a major change, which is we now have mobile apps that are built and exist outside of this backend, web hosted cloud system. And so those are outside of that because again, those are installed from a store onto a user device. And you'll notice that both of those apps will also communicate to the backend system via this API layer, the same way the web app still does in this diagram and did previously. If we look at this again, same diagram, but we're talking about the middleware system. Again, nearly identical. The difference is you're not having client-facing users or customers using it directly. You're simply your actors in the system are now other systems, right? So you might have two or three different systems, but really the core is the same. Like all of these solutions, you have to have the backend piece. There's got to be somewhere to store the data. It's got to have an API so things can access it. And so in this case, again, those accessors are just other systems. They're not client-facing products that we are also building. And if we kind of wanted to look at the most complex or full example here, this is a combination of everything that you would see in a very common MVP build, right? So you've got your backend system with accompanying database. You have the web app, which talks to the backend system. You've got the mobile apps, which talk to the backend system. You've got the marketing site that kind of sits out on the side. And then you have, a third party or other external system that also talks to the same backend. Again, the importance is all these arrows are coming to the backend, right? Like that is very, very critically important in any of these builds. So if we want to add a layer to this, I'm going to call this layer kind of the project view. So really what this is meant to demonstrate is that each of these highlighted sections represents a different project. And by project, I really mean code base, right? So in looking at this, you have essentially three different projects, right? So typically for a kind of a more lean focused MVP build, the backend system with API and that front facing web app can be built in the same technology. That is something that we do a lot. And so that is one project. But if you add mobile apps to that system, you have to build those separately. Those have to be built in a very different technology, and that's its own project that you have to think about. And then obviously the marketing site, I mentioned that's like website builder stuff, but I just wanted to show that is also a separate project, right? That's using different tools, different technology. And if we wanted to make it real complex, you could technically just split them all out, right? So you could actually write a dedicated iPhone app in its own language. You could write an Android app in its own language. You could write the backend in its own technology and language, and the web app can also be completely decoupled from that as well. So this can get more complicated, kind of depending on the needs of the product, but most of the time we are looking more at this picture for a lot of MVP development. So now that we've kind of talked through this, kind of system design, how these systems interact, I do want to talk about code architecture. So what the heck is code architecture? Literally in its purest form, it is how you organize your code. And by organization, I literally mean like where the folders and files go. like that is the simplest, purest form of what code architecture actually means. Now there's decades and decades of different architecture, and you could talk for years and years about this concept, but really in its purest form, it is where does the code go? How does it get there? What does it do? Like just the literal structure of where the files need to go. This is very important for a couple of these reasons here, right? So number one is reusability. Good architecture would mean that you have, commonly reused code exists in some area of the app, and the app knows that. And more specifically, in this case, AI knows that. If you're talking with AI, it needs to know where to put things, right? It needs to know where to find bugs. If you say, hey, AI, there's a bug in this feature, with good architecture or good organization, it's going to know exactly where to check, right? And so this is really just, again, file folder organization. This bottom diagram, this probably looks like total gibberish, and that's okay. I'm going to try to walk through it anyway and just kind of explain how simple this concept can be. This diagram represents a very high level kind of representation of the architecture that I would use if I'm making a mobile app. Again, my career is mostly mobile, so that's mostly what I'm speaking to here. But simply put, all we really have in our mobile architecture are three different layers. You have your UI layer. This is where all of the different UI things happen, right? Your screens, your buttons, your navigation bars, and this text beneath it is really just meant to show you how this looks in practice with folders and files, right? So beneath the UI layer, you would have a UI folder. In that folder, you would probably have a file that represents your navigation bar. You would probably have another folder that's for screens, and all the code for those screens, like a login page or payment page, would go into those files. Or you might have a folder for buttons that contains code for commonly used buttons. The next layer is block layer. Block is kind of a silly and fancy acronym for business logic. This is the layer where all of the kind of decision making or data processing exists. Again, just like the UI layer, this is simply just meaning we've got a folder called block, and within that folder called block, we have different files we call blocks, but they just handle the logic for actually logging in or the logic for actually making a payment. The API layer is kind of the third and final layer. This is where all of the code would live that has our app or our product talking to a backend. So this is just simply the code that says, hey, we need to request some information from some backend system and we need to get a response and handle it that way. So if we actually go through this and see how this would look in practice, so if we're thinking about something simple like logging in, right? So we would start on the UI layer. You have your login screens, you see all that UI. You type in your username and password, you hit a button, and suddenly that code and kind of the working behind the scenes that shifts to the block layer. So now the UI says, hey, block layer, the user just typed in their username and password, right? What do we do with that? Sends it to the block. The block might have some very simple, sanity check logic on that, like maybe like an email validation, right? Did they put the @ sign in? Like we don't want to just send off, data to the API that we know is wrong. So it might have some very quick logic just to say, hey, does this look like a real email address? Cool. And then it simply just passes it to the API layer. And the API layer says, all right, we need to log in with these credentials. That shoots it up to this backend system and just sits there and waits for a response. And once it gets the response, it just passes it to the block layer, back the other direction. Block layer gets the response and says, hey, was this a failure? Like, is there an error? Or did the user successfully log in? And if so, it's going to store whatever that authorization data is, and then go back to the UI layer and say, hey, we got a success, right? UI says, awesome, let's push them to the next screen. So, it can sound in depth, but that's really just a good example of what architecture can kind of help you digest with the flow of data and the flow of where code should go in your app. Again, very, very helpful when we're talking with AI. This next screen, I actually was on the fence about whether or not I keep this in here because I'm not going to go through this. I'm not going to talk about these different languages, but I did want to include something just to kind of emphasize the fact that, there's so many different options for these different, core pieces of an MVP, right? Mobile apps, you can either write code specific for Android or specific for iOS, or find code that works on both and keep it as a single project. Backend, there's tons of options there. Web apps, I mean, there are thousands of popular, ways to build web apps. And then marketing sites, again, are more drag and drop. But I just wanted to include this slide to show like there's a lot to think about here, or have AI think about in our case. But I wanted to kind of just show that to demonstrate that. So the kind of the third pillar here of good planning is something called user stories. So if you haven't heard this, then the obvious question is, what is it? What is a user story? Simply put, a user story allows you to break down features for a software product into bite-sized chunks. Good user stories will always address three things: who you are building the feature for, what that feature is, and why are we building that feature. A second huge piece to a good user story is it needs to be clear and understandable to both technical and non-technical people. Especially being in the field myself, I've seen a lot of like developers write just the craziest user stories. Like, dude, like no one's going to know what this is. Like you've written this way too specific to like what you are doing right now. And that's really not the point here. The point is that anyone with any level of technical experience can read a good user story and know what that actually means. Most of the time for kind of a full product build or a full product MVP build, you're going to have a lot of these, right? Because these are meant to be kind of hyper specific with individual features. And so just an additional step, like you would do with most things, is you would need to organize them in some way. We organize them using something called components. It's really just a bucket to capture a larger set of features. And so kind of this example down here is we might have a component or bucket called user onboarding. And underneath that bucket, you would have all of these different user stories. Like as a user, I can create an account. As a user, I can log in. As a user, I can upload a profile picture, and so on and so on. And so to kind of hammer this in a little bit more, let's look at a couple of examples and see if these are good or bad user stories. So this first example here, as a paying user, I want to be able to change my app settings. So we got to ask those three questions, right? Who is this for? Well, in this case, it is very clear. It is a paying user. It's a premium user of the application. That's crystal clear. What is the feature? That's not very clear. Like to change my settings. What settings, right? Like if I as a developer see this or AI sees this, AI will probably just hallucinate and build something you don't want. But I would see this and go, this is not very clear, right? We need to really be clear on this stuff. And why are we building it? Completely missing from this user story. So I would say this top user story is a bad user story that needs to be rewritten. We can compare that to this bottom example. As a user, I want to toggle app notifications on or off so that I can control whether or not I receive app alerts. Okay, who? Well, in this case, it is any user of the application. That's cool. What is it? It is clearly saying they are toggling a notification setting on or off. So we have clarity there. And we have the why. It is clearly so that users can control whether or not they essentially get interrupted from your app, right? So this is a very good user story. This is very, very clear. What do we do with user stories, right? So we track them. This is just a few random screenshots of some systems and ways that we've tracked them before, but this is a very important part. So, front loading this thought and kind of thinking through what your product needs should result in a slew of user stories. And it's very, very critical that these are tracked somewhere. So we have a few screenshots here. They can be tracked as a list in some sort of backlog. You can put them in an Excel sheet. You can put them anywhere you want. We prefer to, use this more Kanban or Kanban board. I forget how that word is pronounced, but this bottom right image here is, kind of a click and drag, different progress, things like that, that a lot of systems have, like, Trello, if you've heard of that, or in this case, we use Jira, which is a little bit more robust of a tool. And then the final example here is just a way that I've used components before. So I did this for a client in the past. We broke down all their user stories, wrote them all out, organized them by components, and I was able to, since we were organized, I was able to quickly give them a risk assessment with some explanations for each component they wanted to build. So again, just the key emphasis here is you got to track them somehow. You want to keep track of what user stories you want, what might be, priority for your initial release, just making sure that you're organized if you are planning to build software. So now that we've kind of tackled these three big pillars of planning software, let's actually see how we can use AI to plan. And again, this is done through Claude. So I, to kind of prove this, because it's something I do a lot, I kind of went into Claude when I was preparing for this and said, I'm just going to, rip through an example here and make something up. So I came up, if you can't read this, I came up with the prompt that I told Claude that I needed a high-level development plan for an MVP mobile responsive web app. Again, I'm using terms we've talked about, right? I'm clear about using MVP. It's minimal viable product. I'm saying I want it to be a web app, right? I don't need native mobile apps. I need it to be a web app. And then I give a quick description of what this product is. And the product I came up with off the cuff was single pet owners connecting with other single pet owners for romantic connections, right? So it's the cliche dating app, but I figured it's a pretty good example to kind of prove this planning concept out, because everybody over the last decade has always wanted to make dating apps. So it's a very known, feature set. And so I simply just give a quick description and say, this is the goal. This is the product I want to make. And then I ask it, I ask it very, very clear questions. So that's very important. I very specifically said, what system architecture do you recommend? What software architecture do you recommend? And, what are the core components, right? Again, I'm using words we just talked about, these components, like just give me an idea of what components might be in an app like this. And then most importantly, I said, ask me anything, right? Ask me clarifying questions. I want AI to have enough context to actually turn on this. So ask me questions, right? It asked me probably about 10 questions. I just showed 2 here. If you can't read those might be small, but the first one just says, is asking me if I have a preference on system architecture or tech stack. I simply said, nope, just let me know what you think. And then the second one was a more, refined question saying, hey, we're building this dating app. Clearly AI, or Claude in this case, knows what I'm trying to build. And so it's actually asking me feature questions like, hey, when you're matching these people, do you want it to be based on, proximity? Do you want it to be based on, their pets, and different attributes with that, or both? And so it's very good at kind of picking my brain and understanding we have a goal and I need to ask, what what the goal or what the different features need to be. So it's very cool. And then the result of this was a single prompt with these questions. Again, this text might be pretty small here, but the result on the left-hand side, it gave me a full tech stack recommendation. Now, a lot of this is a little bit too technical. I didn't include any of this stuff in the diagrams intentionally, but if we just look for words we've already talked about, we can clearly see the top two. We've got a front end, we've got a back end, right? The front end is the web app. The backend is exactly what we talked about, a backend. All of these other things are essentially just supplemental services that would work with the backend that we don't need to really spend time going in. But for the sake of this exercise, I'm looking at this saying, it knows what I meant, right? It knew what I meant when I said I wanted a web app. It knows I need a backend and it knows I need a front end, right? On the right-hand side, you can see it's actually given me components, right? So just to name a few of these, we've got onboarding, right? Onboarding and authorization. That's very standard. We have their owner and pet profiles, the discovery and matching, right? So it is through asking me questions in this process, it is determined here are some core feature sets that you would need to build this app. The next prompt I did was I asked it to go ahead and give me a system architecture diagram based on this information. And it did. It provided me with a lovely system architecture diagram. Again, just like that tech stack list, a lot of this is going to seem like gibberish. A lot of this won't make sense. That's fine. 90% of this exists to just supplement the backend anyway. So I would say for the intents and purposes of getting to vibe coding, a lot of this isn't that important. These are just very common services that make sense to include in a diagram like this. But if we're looking at it, we can clearly see at the top, it knows our client is a web app, right? It has correctly done that. It knows what it needs to build. And if you go down a couple of layers, you can see, these words we've talked about, like an API, right? Like API is mentioned right there. Okay, cool. Like I feel confident that it knows what I'm trying to build now. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the very next step here is to then try to get the user stories, right? So we talked about the importance of user stories. How do we translate what we're working with into user stories? And it's very simple. We already have the components. So I simply just asked it, hey, we've got these components. Please break them down into user stories following this format. I gave it an example, and then I gave it a little bit of formatting like, hey, I'm a bullet list guy. I read bullet lists a lot better than I read walls of text. So let's make it a bullet list. And it did exactly that. So we can see this, and we can see that these are very well written user stories. They are organized by component. And again, it gave me probably 100, so I couldn't fit it all in a slide here. But I now am looking at this saying, I feel pretty good about this, right? Like I have an idea for an app and I've now used AI to help me drum up the different features. It has broken them down in user stories. It understands the architecture and tech stack we're going to use. And I feel good about it. Like I feel like I'm really building a solid plan. So obviously the next question is, well, then what, right? Like, okay, are we ready yet? Well, before I continue with the example, it's very important to discuss context windows with AI, what that means and how to appropriately use them. So in my experience, this is a question that I think 95% of people think they know the answer to when they talk about AI. I don't think they actually do. So what is a context window? The simplest answer that applies pretty much globally is it's your chat window. It's the chat window you have open with AI. The real definition is it's really just all of the information that you're providing AI that it has access to. But for 99% of use cases, that's going to be a chat by chat basis, right? You open a chat with AI, that is a new context window. You feed it information. And if you have experienced this yourself, you might be familiar with AI hallucinations. Those happen, like if AI is just way off the rails, it's telling you fake facts. That typically happens if your context window is too long. So as an example for that, if I open up an AI chat and I'm talking about something related to business, and then I use that same chat to talk about, getting help generating a contract, and then I use the same chat to say, break down the user stories, that context window is all over the place. Like that AI agent has now 3 different things it's trying to combine into one, and it can just get spun out of control. So knowing that, what is a good use of context windows, right? How would we use those in a more large scale software project. So if we look at this example here for a good context flow, the architecture and planning stuff that I'm showed before, and I'll continue here in a moment. That is a single context window. I opened up a Claude window. I should have called this out earlier, but I am using the Opus model with Claude. I would always recommend for this level of planning use the deepest thinking AI agent you have access to. Trying to use anything else, it always gives me incorrect results for my standards. But I would definitely recommend using more advanced deep thinking agents for this work. But the important part is that is a singular context window. When I am done with my planning and project setup, that window is done. I will not try to do actual code or development in that window. Instead, when I get to that first user story, I will start a brand new context window. When AI completes that user story, that window's dead. I use a new context window, a new chat to work on the next story. Well, this begs a major question, right? Which is, how do these different context windows know what we're trying to build, right? If they're all separate and they don't have shared context on this product, and they don't have shared context with all the planning work we've done, how is it going to know what it's supposed to do? There's two answers to this. These are both specific to Claude, but again, pretty much any major agent is going to have a solution for this. The simplest answer, if you're using the Claude app itself, or either on your phone or on a desktop, is you create something called a Claude project. So just simply opening up Claude, there is a new project button. That project gives you the ability to give it some very brief high-level instructions when you create it. But the real magic is once it is created, there's a section over there on the right for instructions. And we want to fill that instruction section out. Once we have detailed instructions here, we are now code ready. That project is fully code ready, meaning within that project, you could open up a new chat, give it that first user story, and it's going to have all of the context it needs. It's going to know what project it's trying to build, and it will build it. A more technical solution to this is using what's called markdown files, .md files. So Claude specifically has a version called Claude Code. It's really the same thing as Claude, but the difference is, nerdy people like myself, we use it with like terminal or command line, right? Like where it doesn't have a nice little app, you can click buttons and stuff like that. But it lives and exists and runs out of your actual software project. And just like the project we created in the Claude app and gave it instructions, those same exact instructions can be saved into a file called claude.md and just dropped right into the main folder of your project. And anytime you use Claude Code, it by default knows to check. Now, this is very powerful, as you can imagine, for the agency style work we do, because every project will have very different instructions, and those all live within each project. So this is I'm a little on the fence, honestly, if I would recommend trying to get this deep, without some past technical knowledge. But this is an option that does exist, and it is identical to just setting up a project within the Claude app itself. And then again, once you have this file, then you are code ready. Now, there's another big question here, right? And I kind of glossed over it, which is I said a lot of stuff about let's dump these big instruction files in, all this kind of stuff. Well, how do we get those? Where did that come from? Right? Like I didn't just, straight up write 300 sentences about what this project should do. So I literally just asked Claude. So in the same context window I was working with in that example, the very next prompt I just said, this is great. Now please create me a set of instructions for Claude projects as well as a Claude Code MD file. And it did exactly that. So it literally just created the files I needed. This little, screenshot on the right here is more details into what that instruction looks like for our specific example. You can see that it very briefly tells it the tech stack. It gives it the folder layout, which is again callback to our code architecture thing. We clearly see like, all right, it knows how we're laying this stuff out. It gives it all these different common commands for building and much, much more beneath that, right? So beneath that probably includes a lot of project specific information, probably different goals and stuff like that. But the important key here is I didn't have to write this. AI did, right? I just said, hey, plan me this thing. We got through all the planning. I felt good about it. And I said, all right, basically set me up to succeed. Give me the instructions so I can properly use a Claude project, or I can properly use Claude Code within this. So very, very cool. So kind of continuing on with this example, I say things like we are code ready, but how do we actually code, right? Like, we're code ready. That sounds great, but like, what is the actual tangible next step? Well, in the software world, pretty much every project I've ever been aware of, and I would dare say the majority of software projects globally start from things that are called templates or scaffolds. Really, this is like, if you're almost like getting like a resume draft, in Google Docs to fill out for your resume. It's just a simple, just boilerplate, like, hey, we're going to have some stubbed out files, just we're putting files in the right places. They don't do anything yet, but it's simply just setting up what we call a scaffold that like allows a developer, or in our case an AI agent, to look at the project and go, okay, like, we've got a starting point. I'm not having to create the folders to then put the code in. I'm not having to do this. Like, we already have, say, a folder for screens with a empty login screen, so AI would then know, well, that's obviously where the code goes, right? And so, of course, this begs another question, which is, where do these come from? Like, what is this? How do we get them? Well, the answer is it can come from a lot of different places, right? So, honestly, you can do a quick, if you already know the tech stack or whatever, and you're planning with AI, and you can just Google like, hey, give me a, JavaScript web app scaffold, right? And there's probably thousands, if not, infinite different templates and stuff you can download for that. I wouldn't recommend doing that, because that can be a little overwhelming. In our case, with our company, we have a lot of existing template apps that we call base apps that contain a lot more robust functionality. It just makes our lives a little bit easier, but that's also not really applicable here. So what do we do here? Well, you may have already guessed it. If we notice this last line that Claude asked us, it says, want me to generate the starter monorepo scaffold to match the Claude.md. Well, again, lots of complicated words, but we can pick out and say, oh, I recognize scaffold, right? Template. So Claude's literally offering to build this for us. So all we have to do is say yes. That's all we have to do. So once we're at that step, it's a single word prompt to Claude, and Claude will go off and write the entire scaffold for this app based on the project instructions that we've already generated, based on the architecture that we planned. And then we can quickly get to that point where it's like, now we have the code, we have the project, it exists. It doesn't do anything yet, right? But we are now fully ready to start firing off these different user stories in different context windows and having Claude just go to town on it. So this is a section. I struggled with the transition from everything I talked about to this, because this is also a very, very important thing to understand. Anyway, so we have the code in place, we have the template created, or we have the scaffold created. And I do really want to emphasize and discuss, at least on a high level, like, what do we do then, right? Because you might actually build this thing. It exists only on your laptop or your computer. And it's like, well, how does this actually work in the real world, right? I might be churning away. I've got my scaffold set up. We're, 10, 15 user stories in. I'm happy with progress. But like, how does this work in real life, right? Like, how do, other developers do this? How do we get things, what's the process here is really what is it? So starting with source control, what is that? Really, source control is a fancy word for like a shared drive or shared documents where the code lives. Think something like a Google Drive or a Dropbox. It's just that, but for code. The major difference is that using source control, you can create what I can define as like essentially full copies of the code into something called branches. That's kind of the special sauce, versus something like a Dropbox or a Google Drive that keep, versions of each file individually. Source control really keeps versions of the entire project individually. And so what is a branch really? Well, branches, again, like I said, they're just copies of the entire code base. And you would use these for things like, hey, I've got my code over here. I want to make on a new feature, or I want to make a new user story. I want to make a new feature. The correct answer is I would create a branch using source control for that feature. Again, it's copying the entire code base we have over here. Now we're working over here, and we make that feature. And then when we're done, we simply just combine or merge our work back into the main branch. And so it's just good flow. It helps you track progress. And I'll get to a couple of reasons, in my tips and tricks section that might highlight why this can be important if you are just letting Claude rip and you're just vibe coding through a bunch of user stories. I also want to define this concept called a PR, purely because if you are doing this, and especially if you're using Claude, it will probably use these terms. It'll probably talk about PRs. It'll probably talk about source control. It'll talk about branches. A PR, it stands for pull request, fancy terms for just it's the merging process back in, right? So we make a branch, and then when we merge the branch back into our main code, that's just called a PR. And it's just a process where in our world, it allows other developers to maybe look at the code and sanity check it before we say, yep, that looks good. In a non-developer world, it is your opportunity to say, okay, this feature is supposed to be done. I need to test it and know that it works before I put it back into like the main authority version of this code. So here at the bottom, we have a rather, it's actually a little complex. I tried to make it very simple of kind of what this would look like, but really the highlights here is each of these little icons represents one of these branches. Again, we're talking a full copy of the full code base. And so you might have some layout that looks like this, but at the end of the day, all of these different branches are either the dotted line, they're being copied, or the solid line, they are being merged back through a PR. That's the simplest way I can define that. But if we take a look at that graph and we kind of try and combine everything we've talked about into what this would look like, on a practical level, if you're going through user stories at a time, I tried to make this little map icon. So if you follow these instructions and you get your scaffold stood up, you are there. You have one copy of the code base. You have a scaffold. You are ready to start working on that. I would say we call that staging. A lot of people call it different things. I call it staging because staging represents this is the test version of what I consider my product to be. And when that version is good, I will push that version live. So if we, again, combine this with what we've talked about and we look at these different highlights, each of these highlighted sections on the top and bottom here, this is a new context window. So I'm using Claude. I'm in my project. Claude has the instructions. I have my staging environment, or essentially my scaffold, and I say, we're ready to work on the first user story. I sit Claude on it. I say, hey, let's build this. Ideally, it will be a new context window. It will automatically branch that code into a feature branch, which is the same thing as any other branch. We just call it a feature branch because we're building a feature. It will work through that user story. And when it is done, it should close that up and have a nice PR and say, all is good. PR is ready to review. You can then test that work and just say, hey, looks good, and it'll merge it right back into staging, and you just rinse and repeat that process. You go to the next user story, new context window, Claude will create a new branch, Claude will do the work, Claude will say PR is ready, right? And then so on and so on, infinite or in times until your product is done. The only last thing here is that with this staging environment in mind, again, thinking this is supposed to be my full app, under the concept of this is where the code really lives, every branch is just a different feature, and we're constantly merging that back into this staging version. When staging gets to a point where you as the product owner say, this is good to go, we have finished the MVP, I'm good to go live, the typical process is that then gets copied into a secondary branch called production. And that is very important because you will likely be continually modifying this code and adding new features and changing stuff. And we at least want some record of the code that lives in production, right? Like, because if you have a user and you're 2 months into adding new features and the user's like, yo, like the whole thing's broken, you're going to want a record of that. Like, you're going to want to fix that in the exact code they are seeing, right? You don't want to suddenly say, oh, I've got to fix this thing, and the only way to release it to them is to push all of this other work that I'm not ready to push yet, right? So we just want to keep good organization here. And again, this is stuff that Claude and AI can kind of help you with. Final slide here, just tips and tricks. So some fun ones, some interesting ones, but basically I have 4 things that I keep in my mind whenever I'm using AI to do a lot of development. The first one is learn. So basically, you saw in that example, like I had AI ask me questions. Ask me questions until you, agent, feel confident enough in the solution to actually plan it, right? So I put a nice little wall up there. We're collaborating on it. I'm talking to AI like it is a peer, not like a, hey, do this thing and let me know when it's done. It's like, hey, do this thing, but ask me everything. I want to give you all the context in my mind. And the inverse of that is true as well. This is something that I feel like a lot of people don't put a lot of weight in. And so, I don't want to imply that, if you're a non-technical person vibe coding, you need to ask it all these questions about the code it's writing and stuff. We don't need to go that deep, but at least at a high level, if you're talking to AI and it's saying like, no, you really should use Amazon for this. That is the authority. And you're like, well, my developer buddies told me I need to use Azure. Have that conversation with AI, right? Make AI justify that to you because you're going to learn from them. And not a lot of people look at AI conversations that way. Is like it can teach you a lot of stuff. It really can, and it can really break it down quite simply, and kind of help you understand that. So that's a big tip I have. My second big tip is do not be afraid to start over. And by start over, I mean on a context window basis. So a big reason why we split out and have good context window usage is if AI is working on a user story and it just completely craps out, like it is not understanding it, it's building the wackiest thing ever, you can just nuke that context window in that branch, right? No harm, no foul. It's like, okay, well, that failed. Like it didn't understand that user story. You can simply just, nope, we're just going to close that chat window, right? The branch is never merged back into your main code base and just simply start over. So that's a big recommendation I have, especially if you're following kind of this format of doing a lot of this planning and then you plan to use context windows in this way to develop different user stories. Just do not be afraid to start over. Don't panic. It's fine. There's a reason why we split these out in different context windows and we do things like these branches and PRs I talked about because you can simply just delete them. They can just go away and you can say, all right, we're going to try again. New context window, same story. Maybe let's try a different attack here and see if we can get through it. This one is a very funny one, but in more complex tasks or more complex user stories, I've seen AI kind of get stuck. It's either stuck because it's found some weird arbitrary tech thing that it doesn't want to make a decision on, or it might be stuck because it might have more questions that it needs to interrupt itself and ask you. I have found comically that if you simply just tell it, like if you're sitting there and you're like, you're asking me questions you should already know, and like this is kind of like a distraction, it's wasting my time, you can quite literally just tell it like, I'm going to go away for 4 hours. Like I'm not going to be here for 4 hours. Please just solve this. Like you have the context you need, and you will be shocked at how that actually works. It's almost comical, but I've seen tasks where AI is like, I don't know how to figure this out. I need your help. And I'm like, well, I can't help you. I'm leaving. Do it. And it's like I come back a few hours later and it's like, hey, I actually figured it out. Awesome. Thank you. Right. So definitely don't be afraid to give it fun prompts like that. And then the final one here is really just verifying the work that AI does. If it is not correct within that context window, clearly explain what is wrong. Give AI feedback, allow AI to iterate on it if expectations aren't met. And the worst case here again is point number 2. You can just nuke that context window and start over if things get off the rails. But please know that you need to verify the work and you need to be very open about that and give AI your feedback for it to truly understand and do the right thing. All right. So I said I was going to end on a few stories. I know I'm kind of pushing time here, so I'll give a couple of these, but I do have a few of these here. So one of my favorite examples recently, and a great example, is we had a client come to us. This guy had spent probably 6 to 12 months vibe coding an iPhone app. He, is not a technical guy. He followed shockingly good advice. He did a lot of this planning, as I discussed here. He created an entire iPhone app for it's basically for a product in the film industry, and it's rather complex. I mean, it's very impressive what he's made, but he also knew his limitations. So he said, I understand. I'm an iPhone user. I know what I can expect there, but I'm not going to try to vibe code the backend. So he vibe coded an entire app. He brings it to us. He says, hey, I've gotten this far, but I'm well aware that there's no actual backend. Like this is only lives on my phone. It doesn't actually do anything real. There's no data being saved or anything like that. So he was able to come to us. we helped him kind of build that part out and kind of take that app to production. But it was a very interesting and good use of AI, where it's like this is exactly what this vibe coding stuff can do, which is it proved this guy's idea. I mean, he had an app on his phone that he vibe coded that he could demo to investors, demo to potential users, and once he got that traction, then it's like, all right, we can pull the trigger. We can really make this a real thing, and we're doing that now. One of my favorite poor uses of AI is kind of in a similar vein, but we had a client come to us and sign a contract to build an iPhone app. We thought we understood the scope, and we got about 4 days into this contract, shockingly over one weekend, and the client said, "Hey, never mind. I built the entire app myself. Here's the code, and just go ahead and quote me on a price to just release it to the App Store." This guy gave us an 88-page text file that had web code in it, and it was almost completely unreadable. There was no planning, no architecture whatsoever. Again, an 88-page file. That's insane for code standards, right? Like most of these things, when I talk about architecture, a file of code is like 50 to 100 lines, right? Like it's all about organization. And so this was overwhelming, and you had to be the bearer of bad news and go, you have no idea what you made. And he's like, well, ChatGPT says it's an iOS app. It's like, it is wrong, dude. Like, it is completely wrong. And we can't do anything with this. Like, this doesn't mean anything to anybody. So that was one of my favorite poor uses. But I will go ahead and stop there and conclude by just saying, I am a resource. I want to make myself available. I am not here to try and push, business to my business or anything like that. I simply just want to help people. I've seen a lot of people, flail and fail at vibe coding. I've seen a lot of people do it right. And I really, truly believe that this planning step is very crucial. Understanding these components, putting them to good use, it really sets you up to succeed. And I just want to make that known that while I'm not as active as I would like to be in the ShiftChange platform, just because of a lot of other stuff I've got to do in life, I am there. Feel free to contact me, to make a post, tag me in it, all that kind of stuff. I do want to help out as best as I can. And yeah, I guess if anybody's got questions, then I will do my best to answer them.
Well, I just want to say I am blown away. And I think this is another example of the importance of knowing what you don't know and seeking out an expert to help you. Just like, hey, I know the heart's here and the aorta comes off. That doesn't mean I'm going to be cracking the chest and trying to repair the freaking aorta.
Yes.
And I think it's a great example of having awareness of what's available and having the terminology, the lingo, the language.
Yes.
But, for something like this, if you're going to be doing something, you're going to be spending hundreds of hours learning all of this stuff. Or you can work an extra shift or two and pay somebody to do it.
Yes, that is true. That is very true.
So, I put a little comment in here. I was thinking that, how to interpret an arterial blood gas was complicated. Holy shit, this is bonkers.
It is. I mean, I will say one of my biggest struggles with this was like these slides were reworked so many times because it's like, man, these concepts, there is so much content to learn here. And I really wanted to focus on what is the actual reason behind this? Like the code architecture specifically. It's like, what are we really talking about? We're really talking about folders and files. That's it, right? You could get so deep with that, and there's engineers and people that are so opinionated about it. It's like, guys, calm down. We're just talking about what folders to put the code in. That's really what we're talking about here. And obviously, there's a very good way to do this and all that kind of stuff. But I really wanted to try to simplify everything so that it's at least educational on those terms. So if you see an agent say these things, you have something to throw it against and say, oh, I think I know what it's talking about.
Well, I will say, I don't know about Alexander and Nalantha, but this is a masterclass on
well,
kind of like a coding for dummies. And, I could see you taking this content and expanding it out into, a really nice course on how to, to do this. And Caleb, using this as a lead generator for Twin Suns and just saying, hey, look, education, this is what it is if you want to be familiar with the concepts and all this stuff. So I'll get the recording. I'll send you the raw video, a link to the raw video. And man, feel free to use this. I know you haven't given a presentation in 25 years, but holy cow, man, you do an amazing job.
I practiced quite a bit.
Well,
I practiced quite a bit. So.
It shows.
Thank you.
I can't thank you enough. Alexander and Nalantha, what types of things are y'all considering, to work on and, How do you see this content helping you with your entrepreneurial ideas?
This was my first time learning about coding. So,
Oh, nice, nice. Okay.
like, I heard the term so much on, social media
Yeah.
and a lot of physician entrepreneurs creating different apps. And that's what has gotten me interested in this. And so this was a great overview from a high level, kind of seeing what that process looks like.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I I agree. It's like each part could be its own
Yeah.
lecture.
Yes.
Ooh,
It really could be. Yeah.
I've got chill bumps. I mean, I literally just blown away. And
Nice, nice.
I've got something over here. I've got Claude pulled up, and I started working on something a little bit ago. We've got ACEP, which is the American College of Emergency Physicians. The big annual conference is coming up in October.
Yeah.
And I've got an idea of taking all of the entire exhibitor list, the vendor list, and identifying every single company who is physician owned and
Mm.
creating a scavenger hunt. So anybody who goes to ACEP, you can identify, because I want to support my colleagues. That is literally the mission of ShiftChange, is to help
Yeah.
my colleagues. And let's create a scavenger hunt. You go by and you meet with and you talk to every single physician founder at ACEP, and then your name goes into a hat for a drawing. Let's say it's a $500 Amazon gift card. And so I'm kind of playing around with a way over here
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make something like that come to fruition. So I might be reaching out to you with a little bit of help, and happy
Yeah.
to
Absolutely.
pay you for an hour or two of your time to
Sure.
let's
Yeah.
really
But
get
more
this.
than happy to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I do want to add to Alexander your comment about vibe coding. I can give a little clarity there. So I can tell you what most people talk about when they talk about vibe coding is not what I just showed. Now, in my opinion, it should be what I just showed because most people just wing it. Like they open up, like the mentioned that 88-page documents. Like the guy sent us his prompt. Like he just opened up Chat GPT, no idea what model he's using. He's like, I want you to make me an iOS app that does this, this, and this. And it has no context. It has no idea what
Yeah.
it's building. And it flies off the handle and it creates something that admittedly it ran. Like you could make it run and you could put it on a phone and it looked like an app, but it's like, again, that doesn't actually mean anything to anybody. Like we can't do anything with that. Like it's an interesting maybe prototype if we even want to call it that. But it's so I just to comment on that, most people are vibe coding that way. And it's like I
mhm.
really try to make a point, especially with all of our clients and things like this. Like, no, like it's not if you just take the time and think is really what I'm saying. Just think about it and use AI to help you think about it, right?
Mhm.
And it's if you do that, you can actually plan this. And that's a real tangible plan. I mean, of course, I kind of one shot at it in my example, but if I was doing this for real, I mean, there would be a few hours of back and forth. There'd be a lot more context, there'd be a lot more explanation because I obviously have my own opinions on tech stacks and things like that because I've been doing it. And so it'd be a lot more robust, but it's like I cannot it's so underestimated how important that step actually is.
Mhm.
And even in our industry, it's like if you hire a developer and go, build me a system for pet owners to make connections, like they're going to have the same reaction, like what what do you mean? Like how do you want it? Where do we want it? All of these questions are so important. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that. But
Well, I think it's an analogy that we hear all the time, in medicine and elsewhere. It's measure three times and cut once.
there you go. Yeah. Yep.
It's much better to put a couple extra hours of prep back and forth with your LLM of choice and making sure that you get it right before you start deploying. And, you know,
Yes.
otherwise you're going to have to spend a lot of time with the bug fixes and
Oh yeah.
trying to figure
Yeah.
out why it's not going right. So, extra time on the front end can probably save you hundreds of hours and
Oh yes.
thousands or tens of thousands of dollars down the road.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've seen, yeah, we've recovered a lot of these efforts, and it's
I'm
the
sure.
same story every time. It's like,
I bet.
man, this you
I
went,
bet.
you worked on this with no plan, and it shows. It's
Yeah.
like the 90% of what you've done is just going in the garbage. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing we can do with that.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Nalantha, how about you? I don't know
I
if you're.
yeah
I know you're.
yeah I didn't. A great presentation, Caleb. I have a hard time believing you're not a regular speaker.
Exactly, dude.
Great talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Um,
I appreciate that. What you don't know is like I've only done any other public stuff like twice ever in my career, and one of them was a panic attack and I couldn't do it, and the other one I kind of flubbed and it was awkward anyway. So
Well,
it's
dude,
definitely not my forte, but I'm glad to hear that it was good. That is great. I love that. Thank you so much.
I had a quick question. If I understand you correctly, your preferred vehicle for doing this is Claude, and
Yes.
I believe it's Claude Code. And I was wondering if you could contrast that with Claude Cowork. I hear like they're very similar, but I wasn't quite sure, what the difference is, in terms of using it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that is a great question, and if I am being entirely honest with you, I've not used Claude Cowork
hmm.
myself. I've seen the button. I could probably guess at what it is, but I don't want to say anything wrong. So the real answer is I've actually not used Claude Cowork before. I've done all of my work within either Claude projects or Claude Code if it's deep code writing stuff.
I'll
Okay,
try.
got it. Yeah. Well, no, I
I'll
mean,
chime
like,
in on.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going. Keep going.
Oh, no, there's I think there's projects in Claude Cowork. I've used Claude Cowork, but Claude Code seemed like the scary kind of comp sci kind of version. I didn't really know how to
Yes.
dive into. That's all.
Yeah, that like Claude Code is definitely one of those things, and I think I mentioned this. Like, I wouldn't if you're just trying to test this out and vibe code some stuff to just play with it. I would not go down the Claude Code route because that is like anything. If anyone's ever tried to set up their computer to write code, it's like that is completely dependent on your individual computer, the languages you're using, and Claude Code is very much dependent on like you have to be set up to run it. Actually getting it installed and running Claude Code itself is very, very simple, but all of the other stuff is like, if you're writing something in Java, like your machine you have to install all this different Java stuff and be set up to actually have your computer run that. That's the complex part, and that's where it's like, I could probably talk for hours about that, or maybe come up with another presentation in the future that's like, well, here's the path of least resistance to get that. But that is very, very dependent on the tech stack, right, that you're building in, and if you
Hmm.
want to take the time and set up your machine to do it on its own.
So, Nalantha, I can give you an unsolicited recommendation here. Jack Titel, who is also inside the ShiftChange community, he and I met at an angel investing networking stuff. He's got an AI background with, I think he was an AI professor in Rochester, a lot of health tech, AI experience, robotic vision. I mean, stuff that's just way out of my level of understanding. And I started working with Jack as an AI coach. So he has been helping me. And what I do is 1 hour every week, we have a phone call, share screens. He's like, okay, what are you working on? What do you want to do? And $150 an hour, it has been well worth the investment. I just put his LinkedIn profile in here if you wanted to reach out to him, but he has also provided some information and some content inside of Shift Change. And I would say he would definitely be interested in working with you. I don't know, Caleb, is this something that you're interested in doing, like any one-on-one coaching for this type of thing, or is that not your bandwidth doesn't support that right now?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I probably couldn't do a lot of like recurring one-on-one coaching. I'm certainly, if I've got time, I am more than happy to help. And I'm not looking to charge for anything like that. I really just want to help. So I don't mind, carving out a few hours to help with this kind of stuff. And I will say, at our company, there's actually four of us that are partners there, and some of the other partners are much better at that type of stuff, like the one-on-one mentorship. Unfortunately, most of my AI usage is very specific software
Mm-hmm.
development related,
Sure.
or very specific to that type of work. So I probably wouldn't be that valuable in
Okay.
just a more general AI consulting thing, but I'm more than happy to help. I'll be very honest. Like if I look at it and it's like, whoa, yeah, I have no idea. I'll just say that, and we can cut it short. But yeah, I'm more than happy to help. Or I'm sure if I can't help, I can find people that can for sure.
Okay. So Jack, Jack may be because that is what he does. He kind of considers
Yep.
himself to be an AI coach and an AI consultant. So if you ever wanted to, connect with Jack, he would be more than happy to work with you. I went from ChatGPT over to Claude. He, kind of demystified it and got me set up. I've got projects set up. We haven't really dived into Claude Code yet because it scares me a little bit. And but working with somebody, I think that's really another important message that I try to share with people is if there's a skill set that you want to use and learn, reach out and set up a call with somebody. And it might be, hey, I'm going to pay you 5 hours of time. And that 5 hours might be able to accelerate you, and it's worth the investment. There's two letters in the word in the middle of the word investment, and they're M and E. Me. When I started investing in myself with a diet, exercise, health coach, I lost 50 pounds, got off blood pressure medication. I was like, holy shit.
There you
Right.
go.
And then I started working with Rob Orman to help me navigate work life balance, burnout, career transition. Oh my gosh, my life changed. I got better. Working, I invested not where I am right now. I work at a radiology imaging center, but when I'm at home, I've got this elaborate home studio. Man, that made a world of difference, but it was an investment. And I think, as physicians, we're skeptical. We're a little bit on the cheap side, and we are fearful or hesitant to invest in ourselves. And that is a really, really important underpinning of shift change and the work that I do helping my colleagues is that, if the finances are tight, pick up an extra shift, man. Pick up 2 extra shifts. Go do a locums assignment for a week, bankroll some of that money, and then invest in yourself because you are worth it. You are 100% worth it. And that's when things really started to turn around for me, when I started investing in myself. And yeah, I just saw your comment there, the entrepreneur scavenger hunt. That will happen. So I will be, just to let you know, the work that I do with EB Medicine, I'll be in Chicago with EB Medicine at the EB Medicine booth. And, definitely want people to come by and, talk, and we can, talk about CME and stuff like that. But I've also got some freedom and flexibility to do the networking or the net weaving. It's not working, it's weaving. And, creating connections, learning, meeting my colleagues, and helping them navigate. But I think it'd be a fun little thing to do is have because I want to drive business and eyeballs to my colleagues who have taken that risk, who have gotten out there, who are doing stuff, and really try to support them in any way I can. So be on the lookout in the side hustle group. I'll be posting some more stuff in there. And for both of you, if y'all want to set up a call with me, I put my calendar link in there. Set up a call. It's free. I just want to learn from you. I want to share a little bit, and I'd love for y'all both to join the Shift Change community because this is 100% what we do. Facebook is great for onlookers. LinkedIn is great to tell everybody how great you are, but Shift Change is where you come to get shit done. And I will do everything in my power to support you in your journey. So that's who I'm trying to serve and help in this second half of my career. So I am here to support you in any way that I possibly can. All right. Any other
Thank you.
comments? Feel free to jump in.
No, I
Otherwise,
just wanted to thank you, Caleb, and thank you, Patrick, for organizing this to help all of us. Thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Our pleasure.
happy to do it.
And Caleb, you're the man, dude.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I'm glad it went well. I'm glad it went well.
Yes. Yeah, so we'll be once we get the replay, I'll put it in Shift Change. I'll put this one up on public for everybody to view, and you can utilize it however you see fit, man.
Perfect. That sounds great, man. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thanks
All
everyone.
right. Yep. Thank
Thanks,
you, everybody.
Caleb.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Patrick.
All right.
Talk soon.
Bye-bye. All righty.
See ya.
Bye-bye.